Let's talk about late antiquity a little bit. It is a critical period in history. It is a period that shows the transformation of the Western civilization into something new. And there are lots of theories about what has happened and why it happened. Historians are trying to make sense of this degradation trip of classical antiquity. This video tries to give a basic introduction to why this period is so problematic. I figured that probably one of the most effective ways to explain what we're dealing with is to say a couple of words about the sources. Because if you look at the sources for this period, you have a strange feeling that something is deeply wrong here. What's going on? So there you go. 3 important sources on late antiquity. And yes, it is not about these 3 particular sources. It is about the situation we're all dealing with. So the first important source on late antiquity I want to talk about is the Book of Mormon. Please don't skip the next few minutes of this video. Yeah, I know you're probably shocked right now, but there's a good reason why I'm doing this. Okay, the Book of Mormon is a religious text that was written in the 4th century, which kind of fits into late antiquity. This text was rediscovered only in the 19th century, and it was published in 1830. What is interesting about it is that it was found in North America, and it was written on golden plates. Obviously, you cannot see the original golden plates. That is how it usually happens when some old source is being rediscovered. A typical story. But there are copies. This text provides some really eye-opening information. Apart from religious dogma, it explains the migration of ancient Phoenicians from the territory of Judea to North America, and transmission of the knowledge to another continent. This is a very important historical source. Unfortunately, this work is frequently overlooked by the scholars. They consider it essentially a 19th century forgery. It was produced by a man called Joseph Smith, who used to be a conman. And then he decided to start a new religion. So historians who are not the followers of the Latter-day Saint movement don't think it is authentic, and it has zero historical value for the periods of classical and late antiquity. It has value only for the history of modern religions. But the Mormons actually attribute this work to the 4th century. You cannot just dismiss this text. It's not like they're just making stuff up. Well, they are. It is a religious text, and religious texts are not reliable. But it is probably based on something. Not all of this is just pure fiction. Right? Okay. Our second source. Eusebius. There are lots of works attributed to Eusebius. The most famous and important is the Church History, the first history of Christianity, a sequel to the Bible, written in the 4th century. Because, well, it ends in the early 4th century, so it was probably written around that time, right? So Eusebius tells us a lot of stories you cannot find anywhere outside of the religious sources, and usually not really supported by any serious archaeological evidence. Like, persecutions of Christians, church councils. Also, some interesting details on the reign of certain emperors. First of all, Constantine the Great. And panegyric written by Eusebius is considered a very valuable piece of information on the life of this Christian saint. Since Eusebius was a religious author, his works are considered unreliable, because we're dealing with religious texts. Everything is a source, but, there is a difference between a proper historical source and a religious source. What is interesting is that this claim of the Christian churches that we're dealing with the 4th century author is usually not contested by historians. You cannot just dismiss the text of Eusebius. It's not like they're just making stuff up. Well, they are. It is a religious text, and religious texts are not reliable. But it is probably based on something. Not all of this is just pure fiction, right? I think I already said that earlier. But if you think that these works provided by the church are authentic, and to some degree based on reality, and you don't challenge the attribution to the 4th century, the question is, why do you discard the Book of Mormon? Why all of a sudden the Book of Mormon is just some stuff that the conman Joseph Smith made up? And the text of comparable credibility coming from the religious organization of professional conmen, who were caught in the act like hundreds of times and are prominent falsifiers of history, sources, documents, historical evidence, everything. Why do you believe one church and you don't believe another? There can be a number of answers to this question, but essentially it all more or less comes down to this. Mormonism is a new religion. We could witness its inception. Most of its history happened more or less during the Information Age. We saw how it evolved. Everything is quite well documented. And it is easy to come to a conclusion that this is all essentially a scam, and you cannot trust any books these people are showing to you. On the other hand, Christianity is an old religion which dominated the Western world for centuries. That's it. We didn't see the genesis of this religion, but the process was probably comparable and maybe even almost identical. They were doing the same thing, but, just earlier. When? No idea. The texts of Eusebius are attributed to the 4th century, but you cannot be sure about that. Obviously, the Vatican Library can probably show you some manuscripts from what they call the 9th century, but we cannot be sure that these texts had wide circulation or even any circulation before they were first printed in the 16th century, I guess. 300 years before the Book of Mormon. We don't know when it was written. To some extent, this problem is obviously recognized by historians. Religious texts are not trustworthy, and there is this division of sources on late antiquity: Christian sources and non-Christian sources. The unreliability of the likes of Eusebius was understood and taken into account even 200 years ago. If you open the Manual of Ancient History from 1833, they openly say the obvious, that Eusebius, Theodoret, Sozomenes, they should rather be classed with the panegyrists than the historians, and that these works can only be used with circumspection. So, it is taken into account, but sometimes not enough. There is a lot of cultural and historical inertia. A good example is this nice quote, it is even posted on Wikipedia, about Muhammad. On the one hand, it is not possible to write a historical biography of the Prophet without being accused of using the sources uncritically. While on the other hand, when using the sources critically, it is simply not possible to write such a biography. Historians have to write something, and for traditional and cultural/religious reasons, sometimes they are not critical enough of the certain sources. Eusebius is, in many ways, as authentic as Sirah and Hadith. It is easy for a non-Muslim to discard Muslim religious writings and treat them as pure fiction. But it is not easy for a person with a Christian background, even if he is not a Christian himself. It is just a cultural thing. It is not easy to discard Christian religious writings and treat them as fiction. Let's write about persecution of Christians under Diocletian. Our sources are. Oh, I guess we can't write about persecutions under Diocletian. Nobody does that. Okay, fortunately, we have non Christian sources. Here is the third source I'd like to mention Zosimus. Zosimus is an interesting character. His New History is a very important work which covers the history of the Roman Empire from Augustus to the year 410. Some parts of the story are lost, including the ending, the sack from by Alaric, or the reign of Domitian. Zosimus was a non-Christian writer, so this work was not produced by the church. It is not a piece of religious literature. So obviously it is much more trustworthy. We don't know much about Zosimus himself, but we know that he lived in Constantinople in the late 5th, early 6th century. Died probably during the reign of Anastasius. He used to be a comes, which is a position in the government. He was dealing with the finances of the state, uh, which is reported by the Patriarch Photius, a Christian saint who supposedly lived in the 9th century. It is believed that when Zosimus retired, he decided to write this book, and since he was not a Christian, he kind of had this idea that Christianity contributed to the demise of the Roman Empire, and in a way says that the old traditional system of beliefs is superior to Christianity. Which is very, very interesting since, once again, he lived in Constantinople in the second half of the 5th century and in the early 6th century. So imagine a modern historian who holds the official position in the government of Saudi Arabia. Then he retires and publishes a history book where he says that he's not a Muslim, he's not a fan of Islam, and encourages people to leave this religion and come back to, I don't know, pre-Islamic beliefs or switch to Christianity, Hinduism, or whatever. And people read this, it ends up in the libraries. Or imagine a guy in Iran who retires from his job in the Ministry of Finances and publishes a book that goes like, okay, different Persian empires were really great back in the day, but Muslims really screwed things up. Let's switch back to Zoroastrianism. Well, it's impossible to publish this kind of book. And any attempts to do this are gonna get you killed. It is simply illegal in these countries. But somehow we're told that Zosimus was employed by the emperor himself and was writing this kind of stuff in a very repressive Christian state. Obviously, some may argue that the Roman Empire, Eastern Roman Empire, wasn't that repressive towards non Christians during this period of time, which is possible. But what should we do with the sources on the legislature of the Roman Empire? What should we do with the Code of Theodosius or the later Code of Justinian? The laws compiled in these codexes were supposed to be, well, the laws. Some of the laws from the Code of Theodosius were obsolete during the reign of Anastasius, or what? They existed, but they were not enforced. What about Justinian, who became the emperor probably a few years after the death of Zosimus? What is the explanation for all of this? Well, there can be numerous explanations, but all of them are very problematic. Like, okay, for example, let's go with the story that the laws were not enforced and Christianity was repressive, but not that repressive. Well, it kind of contradicts the evidence we have. If you open the Code of Theodosius, well, here we go. The law attributed to the year 395 says that heretics cannot be present in the imperial service. They must be exiled from Constantinople. Okay, Zosimus is technically not a heretic. But then there's a law from the year 408. People who disagree with the emperor on matters of religion are not allowed to serve in the Palatium Militare, which is believed to be, well, in the palace or hold a position in the government. The law from 425. Pagans are punished by proscription, which means confiscation of property and execution. The law from 429 prohibits conversion of Christians to another religion, punished by confiscation of property and execution once again. And in the year 435, all pagan sacrifices are forbidden and pagan temples torn down. So it progressively becomes more and more repressive. Were these laws enforced? Well, here's the story about the war code against the Christians by the Neoplatonist philosopher Porphyry. We're told that as a result of this law from the year 435, all of the copies of his book were destroyed. Porphyry himself was okay because he died more than a century before this event. Probably. You cannot be sure about anything with the sources like that, including that this work ever existed. But yeah, parts of it are reconstructed from the quotes given by numerous Christian writers who attempted to give a competent answer to Porphyry's criticism of their religion. And the original text, as we're told, was destroyed. And what about Zosimus? He publishes a book, no problem. What's going on here? What should we do with this contradiction? Or maybe some of the laws in the Code of Theodosius and the Code of Justinian were just added there at a later date. The most famous forgery of this kind is the donation of Constantine. The Catholic Church just forged a decree and used it for political purposes, until it was proven to be a forgery in the 15th century. Or maybe Zosimus is only presented as a supposedly unbiased non-Christian writer, and his work actually conforms with the Christian interpretation of events. And it was written by we don't know who and we don't know when. Or maybe Christianity wasn't really the state religion of the Roman Empire in the 6th century. That's a wonderful explanation, too. That's a mess. You don't know whom to believe and how to make sense of all of this. And here we discussed only 3 sources. There's more. Okay, nobody thinks that the Book of Mormon is a source, but we discussed the Code of Theodosius a little bit. I hope I gave you some food for thought and described what we're all dealing with. And if you'll think about it for a moment, well, how scary it is. Thank you for watching. You can destroy me in the comment section anytime. Or you can share, like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. So, see you soon.